I worked at CNN, it was very much drummed into us. We had to be completely non-partisan. There couldn't be any sense that anyone knew which side we may be on. When I watch CNN now, and I love CNN, many friends there, had a great time there. When I watch it, it seems like you kind of abandoned any pretense of being non-partisan. You've taken a view, if the president's going to whack us as fake news, we're going to whack him pretty well consistently. Do you think that longer term, that is a sensible position for CNN to take?
Well, you know, Piers, I'm not sure I agree with that assessment. I think that we have been very tough on this president, and I'm glad you asked about this, as I write about in my book. You know, there have been times when we've had to call him like we see him, as we say here in the U.S. There aren't always two sides to a story, especially when it's a matter of right versus wrong. And take, for example, the tweet that he put out, and we have to call it as such.
Yeah. Sir Kim Darroch, the ambassador to Washington, has just resigned because of these leaked cables, diplomatic cables, in which he claimed that the White House is clumsy, inept, dysfunctional. Do you think that he's right?
You know, I've covered this ambassador. I've met with him over at the British ambassador's residence. He's very well respected in Washington, perhaps not inside the White House. But, you know, Susanna, what the ambassador has to say about President Trump pales in comparison to what members of the Trump administration have said. You know, Rex Tillerson, the former Secretary of State, and so on, they've described the president in some pretty harsh terms. I talked to one senior White House official for this book. I was sitting down with him one day for drinks. He sat down across from me and said, "The president's insane." And I asked what this person meant, and this senior White House official said, well, the president just doesn't have any concept of what the Constitution here in the United States entails and how it constrains the president from time to time. And so what we hear from people inside the administration, inside the White House, is that they're exhausted working for this president. And I think Kim Darroch was expressing some of that. He was essentially saying, you know, working on behalf of the British government here in Washington, it can be an exhausting experience because you're dealing with a president who just hasn't done this before and doesn't, you know, from time to time really understand what he's doing when it comes to running the United States of America.
He's also though, hasn't he, Jim? He's made a lot of the media very famous. You've become a bit of a star.
Right.
Made the media lots of money. CNN's been making hundreds of millions out of Trump. The New York Times has seen subscriptions go through the roof. Every late night show that's on a Trump bashing thing makes a fortune. So there is this sort of weird correlation between taking a pretty negative Trump position for media organizations, not just CNN, but others, and making a ton of money.
We're banging up against decades of tradition of holding the presidency in high esteem, high regard. And to some extent, Donald Trump has obliterated that. He is the one who's torn up the rule book. And as I describe it in my book, a different kind of presidency requires a different kind of playbook for journalists and for citizens. And when the president of the United States refers to us as the enemy of the people, I think, you know, we have a couple of choices. I describe it as a question of what would you do? Do you stick your head in the sand or do you push back?
Now, Jim, I've always found you a rather charming chap. Certainly not a rude, terrible human being. But I suppose...
I don't think I am.
But let me ask you a difficult question. What do you like about Trump and where do you think he's been successful?
Well, you know, I used to watch The Apprentice here in the U.S. I thought it was a terrific TV show. I mean, you have to be honest about it, Piers. And I think, you know, you understand this just as well as anybody. He is very good at television. What Donald Trump does is he loves the coverage, but he hates the scrutiny. And one of the things that I think he's run up against here in Washington, up in New York, you know, I describe New Yorkers as the least surprised people in the world because they've been dealing with this for 20 or 30 years. Donald Trump would show up, give a press conference, talk about Trump steaks, Trump water, and the press would eat it up. They loved his brash demeanor and so on up in the Big Apple. He came down to Washington and ran into a different kind of world where you're completely accountable for what you say. The Washington Post has concluded recently that he's uttered some 10,000 false or misleading statements since coming into office. That makes us fact checkers in real time. And Piers, my question is, what kind of world would we be living in right now if we just accepted all of the things that he said over the last couple of years as fact?
I get all that. But my question, again, was just, you know, all right, you sort of skirted around that you like the fact he's good at TV, but what do you think he's been successful at? Because many people would argue there are lots of things he's done pretty well at amid all this noise, and that as things stand, he might well get re-elected. Are you able to identify things that Trump has had wins on?
Absolutely. I would say on the economy, he is on a winning streak right now. As the Dow goes up, so do his prospects for winning re-election. And I don't think, I think we've been pretty clear about that. And we've been covering these economic gains ever since he's come into office. And so I don't think there's any, I don't think there's any dispute there. The question Piers, is whether or not Americans are going to be willing to trade those economic gains and for what we're seeing on a daily basis and accept what we're seeing on a daily basis. You can't have a situation in this country, Piers, where where he thinks it's acceptable for the presidency of the United States to be in a position where the commander-in-chief, the leader of the free world, feels it's okay to refer to the press as the enemy of the people or any segment of American society. As I write in this book, this kind of rhetoric has been absorbed by Trump supporters and then directed back at us in ways that make us feel threatened and endangered. Piers, you have reporters who are receiving death threats all the time. I get them on a weekly basis. I now have to go to Trump rallies with bodyguards, not to get too heavy with your morning audience. But this is the reality that we're facing here in the United States now. And so, yes, we can certainly talk about Trump's successes, Trump's gains, but at the same time, we can't overlook what's been happening here in this country. We're supposed to be a beacon for democracy around the world. And I think that's called into question when the president engages in this kind of behavior. And as I write about it,
Difficult question for you. Should you, as the White House guy for CNN, be doing a book at all about the president while he's still sitting? I mean, does it look like you're cashing in?
Yeah. Well, Piers, I am not the first White House correspondent to write a book while covering this beat. Other reporters have done it. Other reporters have done it during this administration. And so this is something that's happened before. I do think, the experience that I've had covering this administration has been unique in that, I was thrust into a lot of this. When the president first called me fake news, first called CNN fake news, my life changed. My Twitter account became something of an open sewer. And it continues to this day. There are violent and threatening messages that stream into my social media accounts. And, it has changed my life. And I thought that it would be an interesting thing for folks to read at home, and think deeply about where we are as a country right now. Piers, the thing that I am trying to get across with this book is I think this is a very important moment in American political history. And I think around the world, you're seeing these nationalist movements pop up across Europe. You're dealing with it in Britain right now. And I hope people, when they read this book, they think deeply about what's going on with our politics. They hit the pause button and they think about whether or not we want to hand off to the next generation of Americans or Brits a kind of political culture where this kind of rhetoric and behavior is acceptable.
Okay.
My sense of it is not, and I hope that we can move forward in a direction where we can have our differences, but not be at each other's throats the way we have been.
Final question, Jim. You'll miss him when he's gone, though, won't you? Because he's been great for business.
I don't know about that, Piers. I think that, he has made it very interesting here in Washington. And as you know, when he comes over to London, it certainly causes a scene. That makes, life very interesting as a political correspondent, as a White House correspondent, and so on. But I do think we have to think very deeply about what's happening to our politics right now, whether or not all of this is sustainable. My sense of it is, covering this a long time, and Piers, you've done this a long time, covered this political scene here in the U.S. a long time, is that we are kind of in a unique moment, and we have to describe it as something that I think is particularly troubling. And my hope is that when people read this book,
is that we have managed to find our own version of Donald Trump, Boris Johnson, who's about to become Prime Minister by the look of things. So we've got double trouble.
No matter which side of the pond you're on, we do have a lot to deal with right now. But, thank goodness we have a free press here in the U.S., a free press over there in the U.K., so we can do the job that we've been doing over these last few years and continue to hold their feet to the fire. That's what it's all about, Piers. And can you imagine a situation where we weren't doing that sort of thing?
Yeah, I completely concur with you. Listen, I completely believe in a free
I
press.
don't think Jim Acosta should have to justify why he's writing a book about what he does and the scrutiny of the president while the president's
Jim Acosta can answer tough questions. He's the great grand inquisitor
why
himself.
Why should he have to defend himself? And is it worth it? If you're getting a death threat a week, Jim Acosta, do you feel like it's worth it?
Well, as I write about in this book, I think it is worth it. And, people will say, oh, Jim, you're just showboating and trying to cash in and so on. I grew up right across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. in Virginia. My father's a Cuban immigrant. He fled from a communist country as a young boy. And my family, we built this life here in the U.S. that we're enormously proud of. We're enormously proud of this country. Enormously grateful for the relationships that the U.S. has with countries like Great Britain. And I just, my sense of it is that I'm approaching this from a patriotic, love of country perspective. Here we get dehumanized and de-Americanized to some extent as reporters here in the U.S. by this president. And I think one of the reasons why I wrote this book and decided to call it The Enemy of the People is I want people to think about that expression.
Yeah.
It's not okay for us to refer to our fellow Americans, our fellow human beings, as the enemy. I am not your enemy. You
I agree
are not
with that.
my enemy.
I agree with that. But
We're
what
not the enemy of the people.
I would say, Jim, is I do watch CNN a lot when I'm in America. You guys do dish it out to Trump 24/7. So
And Trump dishes it back.
it's not completely one-way traffic, is it? I mean, you love whacking him and he loves whacking you.
It's not saying it's one-way.
There are benefits to both sides, I think, of this. But Jim, it's great to talk to you. Best of luck with the book.
Great talking to you,
and
Piers.
great to have you on our airwaves over here. And send all my best to everyone at CNN.